When you look at the implications of the meeting that President Trump will have with Jean-Claude Juncker will do, how can the president, of the Commission actually try and de-escalate this?
He has a really hard task in front of him because Trump has made it very clear that he's interested in this type of protection on cars. So it's not obvious that Juncker is going to be able to de-escalate the situation. In fact, they're already drawing up a list of goods that they would actually retaliate on if Trump goes ahead with his tariffs. So these auto tariffs, if Trump imposes them, they are a massive escalation in this trade war that's already having negative implications on the U.S. market.
Sonja, what does this mean for actually, your worldview on car makers? Do you not buy them at all because you could see something turning ugly, especially for German car makers, or do you buy on the dip?
I think you see part of this already reflected in share prices. It's by far one of the weakest segments in the European market. Very clearly, everyone tries to figure out what the implication would be, and it's not as straightforward because, let's face it, none of the car manufacturer would take it on their own P&L. So the whole supply chain would suffer, and hence it's not as straightforward as it might seem. Yet it would be a real impact on the European economy, and I think it's probably one of the toughest measures because we know tariffs are most effective if they hit finished goods rather than the raw materials. So the further you go up in the supply chain, the harshest these measures are. And this is why obviously Europe was very clear that they would retaliate if that were to happen.
Stephanie, we're throwing around a lot of multi-syllable words: unilateral, plurilateral, bilateral, maybe mercantile is another multi-syllable word. What's the game theory of all this? How big a level of the game of chicken are we playing?
We're in a really dangerous game of chicken, as you say, and I think the challenge for the EU will be what to do next. They've adopted the traditional tactic of retaliation, which is what game theory suggests is the right strategy. They've retaliated on these politically salient issues like bourbon and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. That works once. What do you do in the second round of retaliation? What do you do in the third round of retaliation? And this traditional retaliation, it doesn't work that well in these modern economies with global supply chains. The EU said, oh, we're going to impose tariffs on U.S.-made ketchup, Heinz ketchup, in an attempt to hurt this iconic U.S. product. And Heinz said, look, the ketchup we sell in Europe is made in Europe. So it's difficult for the EU. They're in a tough position. They want to retaliate. They've retaliated once.
Yeah,
these sanctions get less and less useful over time.
Brilliant answer. And Stephanie, where I would go further on this is the idea, folks, in an early spat, the game theory is to go narrow, HDI, Harley-Davidson, and then you broaden it out. Stephanie, have you or anybody else at LSE thought through what it means for the small truck industry in Europe? I mean, there's huge barrier of entries for a Volvo truck from Europe to get into the United States. What's it mean when they go broader, the second or third round?
It's a good question. We know that there are 25% tariffs on light trucks going into the United States, so that's a huge barrier to trade. But the European Union, if they have to retaliate again, they're going to go broader. They're going to have to put tariffs on other products that are going to actually hurt EU consumers more, because what the European Union has done in a very clever strategy is try to impose maximum political pain on the United States by targeting Harley-Davidsons that are made in Paul Ryan's district, bourbon that's made in Mitch McConnell's district, while minimizing the pain for European consumers. When you go broader, you're increasing the pain for European consumers because you're imposing tariffs on goods that many more consumers are actually trying to purchase.
Sonja, if we go a step further, would the Fed actually be unable to hike rates if the trade war escalates?
Yeah, I guess eventually in the long run, when we see the real economic impact of tariffs, because again, for the time being, we're just estimating what the impact will be. But eventually, yes, you would expect that trade wars do not know any winners, and hence the economic impact will be negative. This will have an impact on the forecast of the Fed, and you would imagine that eventually then they will have to lower their forecast for rate hikes. But that might take some time to feed through.